What factors account for the growth and progress society experienced during the Antebellum Era? Number one, Clay's American system led to increased prosperity. Number two, schools and the penny press led to a growth of the literate middle class. Number three, laissez-faire government policies protected property and provided funds. Tariffs and the sale of public lands, as well as patents, helped to contribute to economic growth. Number four, technology. Mass production, interchangeable parts, as well as steam engines helped to grow the economy. Number five, the rise of market capitalism. With more commercial farms, corporations, and factories, improved transportation, better banking, insurance, and credit, the economy grew. Number six, cheap land. The opening of the West allowed for more people to purchase land out west for very cheap, also bringing in more resources. And finally, cheap labor. Under the Lowell system, women and children worked in factories, immigrants worked in factories in the North, and then you had slaves working in the South. The first American Temperance Society was founded on February 13, 1826. The purpose was to decrease the consumption of alcohol. The leader of the union was Lyman Beecher, who was also a leader of the Second Great Awakening. It was the first U.S. social organization to promote national support for a national cause. The movement was a result of increased consumption of alcohol and the people's desire to improve the better general family life. So naturally, as the American people drank more alcohol, the reaction to these negative effects increased as well. This led to over 2,200 temperance societies in 5 years, and 170,000 men who took a pledge of abstinence from alcohol. Churches were the center of much of the activity. As time went on, the people involved in the temperance movements went from encouraging abstinence of alcohol to demanding the prohibition of alcohol. They called it demon rum because it was said that the devil used it to take people off their righteous path. By the year 1835, there were over 1 million members of temperance organizations across the country. The society was most successful in the northern states. A growing movement focused on the need for free public schools for children of all classes. It was led by Horace Mann, who was a leading advocate of the public school system. He pushed for compulsory attendance, longer school year, and increased teacher prep. Another important leader was William Holmes McGuffey, who created textbooks to teach reading and morality. Textbooks taught the virtues of hard work, punctuality, and sobriety, much needed in an industrial society. Protestant denominations founded several private colleges in new western states, such as Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. And several new colleges began to admit women. An increasing number of criminals, emotionally disturbed persons, and paupers led to the asylum movement. New public institutions were created that included state-supported prisons, mental hospitals, and poorhouses. Dorothea Dix launched a countrywide crusade to publicize the horrible treatment of mentally ill persons who had been locked up with criminals. This led to states building mental hospitals or improving existing ones to allow for mental patients to receive proper treatment. If you remember from a previous video, the cult of domesticity stated that women were the moral leaders of the family, teaching children ethics and morality. Sarah and Angelina Grimke were sisters who were also abolitionists. They also objected to male opposition to their cause. They attempted to attend an international abolitionist convention in London, but were not allowed in the door since women did not have a role in government. They left feeling that if they wanted to make true change in society, they needed their voices heard. The only way to do that was to gain women the right to vote. This led to the birth of the women's movement at Seneca Falls. Other important crusaders were Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who also campaigned for women's rights. Leading feminists met in New York at the first ever Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls. They issued a document very similar to the Declaration of Independence, titled the Declaration of Sentiments. In it, they declared all men and women are created equal and listed their grievances against laws and customs that discriminated against women. The roots of the colonization movement date back to various plans in the first proposed in the 18th century. From the start, colonization of free blacks in Africa was an issue on which both whites and blacks were divided. Some blacks supported emigration because they thought that black Americans would never receive justice in the United States. Others believed African Americans should remain in the United States to fight against slavery and for full legal rights as American citizens. Some whites saw colonization as a way of ridding the nation of blacks, while others believed black Americans would be happier in Africa, where they could live free of racial discrimination. Still others believed black American colonists could play a central role in Christianizing and civilizing Africa. The American Colonization Society was formed in 1817 to send free African Americans to Africa as an alternative to emancipation in the United States. In 1822, the society established on the west coast of Africa a colony that in 1847 became the independent nation of Liberia. By 1867, the society had sent more than 13,000 emigrants. Beginning in the 1830s, the society was harshly attacked by abolitionists who tried to discredit colonization as a slaveholder scheme. And after the Civil War, when many blacks wanted to go to Liberia, financial support for colonization had waned. During its later years, the society focused on educational and missionary efforts in Liberia rather than emigration. The American Anti-Slavery Society, founded in 1833, was one of the most prominent abolitionist organizations in the United States during the early 19th century. It hoped to convince both white Southerners and Northerners of slavery's inhumanity. The organization sent lecturers across the North to convince people that slavery was immoral and ungodly and thus should be outlawed. The American Anti-Slavery Society also bombarded the United States Congress with petitions calling for the end of slavery. Rather than addressing the slavery issue, Congress imposed the gag rule, stating that Congress would not accept any petitions from the people of the U.S. that pertained to slavery. Unlike earlier organizations, the American Anti-Slavery Society members called for an immediate end to slavery. Most of the Society's members also demanded that African Americans receive the same political, economic, and social rights as white people. Leadership of the Society soon passed to William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was perhaps the most vocal and best-known opponent of slavery before the Civil War. Under his leadership, the organization attracted more than 150,000 members. Garrison is also best known for his newspaper, The Liberator. Originally in favor of colonization, Garrison became the leader of the abolition movement. His newspaper reached thousands of individuals worldwide. 75% of his subscribers were free African Americans. In 1840, the American Anti-Slavery Society split. Garrison and his supporters called for the creation of a new government that prohibited slavery from the very beginning. He contended that the United States Constitution was an illegal document because it denied African Americans their freedom. If the South would not agree to form a new nation that outlawed slavery, Garrison said that the North should secede from the United States and create its own country. Some members of the American Anti-Slavery Society thought that Garrison's views were too radical. They agreed that slavery was wrong, but believed that the U.S. Constitution had created a legitimate government under which the people had the right to end oppression. These abolitionists hoped to elect people of their beliefs to political offices to make laws ending slavery. To achieve this end, the abolitionists formed the Liberty Party. Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave who became a prominent activist, author, and public speaker. He became a leader in the abolitionist movement, which sought to end the practice of slavery, before and during the Civil War. After that conflict and the Emancipation Proclamation of 1862, he continued to push for equality and human rights until his death in 1895. Abolitionist author Harriet Beecher Stowe rose to fame in 1851 with the publication of her best-selling book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which highlighted the evils of slavery, angered the slaveholding South, and inspired pro-slavery copycat works in defense of the institution of slavery. The turning point in Stowe's personal and literary life came in 1849, when her son died in a cholera epidemic that claimed nearly 3,000 lives in her region. She later said that the loss of her child inspired great empathy for enslaved mothers who had their children sold away from them. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which legally compelled Northerners to return runaway slaves, infuriated Stowe and many in the North. This was when Stowe penned what would become her most famous work, the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. Originally serialized in the National Era, Stowe saw her tale as a call to arms for Northerners to defy the Fugitive Slave Act. The vivid characters and great empathy inspired by the book further aided Stowe's strong Christianity. Uncle Tom's Cabin was released as a book in March of 1852, selling 300,000 copies in the U.S. in the first year. It was later performed on stage and translated into dozens of languages. When some claimed her portrait of slavery was inaccurate, Stowe published Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book of primary source historical documents that backed up her account, including the narratives of notable former slaves Frederick Douglass and Josiah Henderson. Stowe used her fame to petition to end slavery. She toured nationally and internationally, speaking about her book and donating some of what she earned to help the anti-slavery cause.